I'm excited to share some highlights from our new SurveyCTO 2.40 release. This release includes a few major platform improvements, as well as a series of smaller refinements, all in response to requests from our growing worldwide user base. So thank you to everybody for the wonderful feedback and ideas that have made this release possible. The biggest thing about 2.40 is the addition of a new review and correction workflow. For the past 5 years, we've gotten steadily better at helping you to quickly and effectively identify potential problems in your incoming data. In just the last year, for example, we introduced the Data Explorer, which helps you to review incoming data both at the aggregate and at the individual level, respond to warnings from automated quality checks, inspect photos and listen to audio audits, and more. But as easy as we've made it to review incoming data, we've never made it particularly easy to annotate or correct that data. But now we have. We've also expanded the range of options you have for collecting and mapping GPS data, made some key case management improvements, and refined several aspects of the SurveyCTO administration console. So I'm going to jump right in and quickly walk you through some of the highlights. To show you the new review and correction workflow, I'm going to start here on the Monitor tab of my SurveyCTO server console, where my incoming data comes in and I can get a first look at it. If I scroll down to the Form Submissions and Dataset Data section, we can see that I have this sample household listing form here. I have the option to monitor form data as I have in prior releases. I could purge data, look up data by unique key. And I have a new option here for Review Workflow. I'm going to go ahead and click that. We can see that there's a checkbox here to enable the review and correction workflow. By default, all SurveyCTO forms that you create start out as they always have, where data that comes in is in some sense auto-approved as it arrives. If you've configured publishing to an external dashboard or some external system, data that would come in would publish directly out to those other systems. People downloading, exporting data for analysis would see that data right away. I'm going to go ahead and check this box now, though, for this form. And once I have, what happens is that new submissions that come in are held for review and have to be either approved or rejected before they're passed along for data analysis or published to external systems. I'm going to go ahead and say OK there. And I'm going to just pause for a few moments here so that my colleagues can submit some data. Okay, my colleagues have submitted data, and I've just gone ahead and refreshed my SurveyCTO server console. So you can see now that I have some alerts here. If I click, it says that there's data awaiting review, 2 submissions for this sample household listing form. If I click on the alert, it'll go ahead and scroll me down to the sample household listing form in the Monitor tab. And I can see now that there's this new yellow panel that says that there's new data awaiting review. And importantly, that these 2 submissions have not been approved or released yet for publishing or export. We'll go ahead and click the Review Now button to review that data. It goes into the Data Explorer, and because this particular form was encrypted using my own public-private encryption keys, I have to select the private key in order to be able to decrypt that data here in my browser. So you can see here now I'm in the Data Explorer where I can look at the submissions details just like before, but there's this new yellow bar up top which has options to approve, reject, correct, or comment on the submission. You can see that I can also scroll over to the second submission here, and I can view these submissions in detail. So for example, I can zoom in on the individual maps in order to see where the data was collected. If there are photos available as part of the submission, I can also open those photos in place to look at those. If there's a text audit information, I can show the details about when the different questions were asked and how much time was spent on each question. And so these are all standard features of the Data Explorer. But now if I notice something that makes me concerned that there's a problem with the data, then I can go ahead and intervene and make corrections. So for example, if I go over to this first submission, one thing that I noticed is that the last name of the respondent was James. And I might have some reason to believe that that was actually meant to be James. So I click this little pencil icon, and it shows me the raw data, and I can correct it and say James, and I can save that. You can see now that I have a Save Changes button up here. As always, we try to allow you to work offline as much as possible, even when you're using your web browser, in case your internet connection is not quite that reliable or is going in and out. I've gone ahead and made this change, but I haven't saved it to the server yet. I can also make comments, and so here I'll say, believe that S was missing from last name. Just save that comment. And so this comment is a little bit like in Google Docs or Google Sheets. Just in the sidebar here, comments will accumulate as different people make comments on the submission. So I'm going to say that I don't see anything else wrong with this submission, and I'm going to go ahead and approve it. So it asks me if I want to confirm. I'll say yes. Another comment was added to the thread just to indicate that I had approved the submission. So anytime there's a change to the approval status of a submission, that'll also be logged in the comment thread. I'm going to go here to the next submission. I don't have a lot of reason to do this, but just for example purposes, I'm going to go ahead and reject this one. Submission rejected. So now I'm going to go ahead and save changes. Just one thing I'd like to point out is that this was an encrypted form, and the changes, the corrections that I make to the data when I'm reviewing it, those changes to the data themselves could be very sensitive. And so actually all of the corrections that I'm making here in the Data Explorer are then actually being encrypted and sent to the server in an encrypted bundle. So that still nobody on the server who doesn't have the private key is able to decrypt that corrected data. So I'll show you now how this data looks if we go back to the server console. So now if I refresh, I can see that there are no longer any submissions that are awaiting review. I can see that there are 2 submissions that are complete and that one of them has been approved. If I go over to the Export tab, I go down to my data, I can see again that I have 2 complete submissions here. If I say that I'd like to download the data, note there's a note here that says that not all submissions have been approved for export. And by default, we only export approved submissions. But note that that rejected submission, I could still export that if I chose to. But here I'm just going to export approved submissions in wide format. I'm going to say that I want to download my data now. Again, I'm going to have to select my private key to decrypt the data in order to export it. So note here that I've been given both the wide format CSV file with the raw data, but I've also been given a correction log CSV file. This is a full audit trail of all of the corrections made to the data that's here in the CSV file. So let me show you what that looks like in the data. So our wide format data looks pretty much like it usually does when you export from SurveyCTO. All of the raw data is here in various columns. The data is as it was corrected. So for example, the respondent name here, we can see that there is an S on the end of James. All of the corrections will have been applied to the data as it's exported, also as it's published out to Google Sheets or through webhooks or downloaded through APIs. All of the corrections that were made to the data will be reflected as it's published or exported. We've also added a few extra columns to the export. So for example, review comments. So this column captures all of the comments that were made as part of that review process, including that initial comment that I made manually, and also the comment that was automatically added when I approved the submission. There's also a note here about all of the fields that were corrected and who made those corrections and when. And this is important so that people know that they're looking at data not exactly as it came in, but as it was corrected. If I flip over to that correction log CSV file, we can see an additional level of detail. So here, for every single correction that was made as part of this data set, as part of the review process, we can see which submission was corrected, which field, what the old value was, how it was corrected, what the new value was, and who did it and when they did it. So each and every correction made to each and every submission as part of this data set will be reflected here in the corrections log file so that you know exactly everything that happened to your data from the point in time that it was came into SurveyCTO, corrected, and then exported again. So this entire review workflow is optional, so any new SurveyCTO forms you create, by default, there's no extra review or correction necessary. Data comes in, it flows directly out to outside systems, to your exports. But if you choose to enable this review and corrections workflow, you do have the option to make corrections to your data, comment on the data, and then see all of that reflected in the exports. So now I'll quickly introduce you to a few of the new options we've added for GPS data collection. Here in the Form Designer, you've always been able to add geopoint fields to a survey form in order to collect a specific GPS location. Now we have a few new options available, and they've been brought under this geo ... field type. So there's actually three options in here now: a geopoint field type, geoshape, and geotrace. And as with any of the other field types, there's help available. So if you click into the help, you can find more details on each of the geo options that are available, including information about optimizing performance, some new offline mapping options that are available, and details about how the data will look when you download it. So if we add a new geo field to a form now, we have this option to choose either a geopoint, a geoshape, or a geotrace. Geoshape is essentially going to show the user a map and allow them to outline a boundary on that map. This might be a refugee camp, it might be an agricultural plot, would depend on your context. But basically, it allows the user collecting the data to interact with a map and define some sort of boundary by dropping pins. And I'll show you how that looks in a second. Geotrace is similar, but the idea is that you're actually tracing your current location over time and dropping pins as you go. So you might walk around an agricultural plot or a refugee camp, or you might walk from one location to another, meanwhile tracing the path as you go along. I'll also show you briefly how that looks on the device side. Configuring it here in the Form Designer is as easy as configuring any other type of field. So if I want a geoshape field, I can just go ahead and give it a name and save it. Now, here on my device, I'm going to go ahead and click the Fill Blank Form button, and I'll select my GPS example form. Move forward, and the first field in this example survey is a geoshape field. So I'll go ahead and click the Start Geoshape button. It asks me if I want to go ahead and zoom in the map into the current location. So I'll say yes. And what I want to do is I'm going to pan over, and I want to just trace a certain boundary here of a particular area on this map. This is just meant as an example. I can go ahead and long press on the map in order to drop a pin. Then I can drop a second pin, and it'll connect the points. I can drop a third pin, and it'll actually go ahead and connect those points, making a triangle. And I can continue to drop pins in order to define the overall area. When I'm done, I can click the little floppy disk icon to save. We can see that a set of GPS coordinates have been saved. I'm going to move forward to an example geotrace field. Now, if I click here, it's going to first give me that same option of whether I want to go to my current location. And then if I click to start dropping pins, it's going to ask me if I want to be in manual mode or automatic mode. If I say automatic, will let me select how often I want to drop pins as I'm moving along. And so by default, it says it's going to drop a pin every 20 seconds, and that's fine for my purposes here. So I'm going to click Start. Now, in addition to the pins that will drop every 20 seconds as I move along, I can also click at the top of the screen this Record GeoPoint button, and that will go ahead and drop pins also. And when I'm done, I can click the floppy disk icon to save. And for geotraces, I can save as either a closed polygon, in which case if I was tracing some sort of boundary, it would connect all of the points and enclose that boundary in a polygon. Otherwise, I can save as a polyline, which would be for tracing just the path from point A to point B without closing the lines in a polygon. So I'm going to go ahead and say just save as a polyline. I didn't really walk around while I was doing this, but that's the basic idea. So I can go ahead and save this and exit, and then send this to my server. So here in the Data Explorer, I can get a look at how this data looks as it's coming in and as I'm reviewing it. I click to zoom in on my one submission here that I just collected on my device. I can see that the raw GPS data is here. I can also click a View button to expand that. I could switch into satellite mode, I could switch into a full screen view if I wanted to explore it more, but you can see that that boundary, that data that I collected is right here on this map, and I can view it in broader context if I zoom in and out, and that kind of thing. For the geotrace field, I can go ahead and click and view that as well. It wasn't much, I just collected a few positions as I was sitting here recording the video, and so this data isn't very impressive, but you can imagine if I had walked around the building, or I'd walked around a camp or a village boundary, then I'd be able to also see that traced data here in the map view. So those are the main highlights for the new GPS data collection options, although there are a range of options also available on the device for preloading offline map tiles. So if your users aren't going to have internet connection in the field, but you still want them to be able to interact with maps and draw boundaries and that kind of thing, then there are options available now for loading onto the devices the map tiles that are necessary for them to be able to operate and collect this kind of rich GPS data fully offline. So now I'll show you what we've done to improve the case management user interface. So I'm back here on the Design tab of my server console. I'll scroll down to the group where I have my case management example set up. And I have my cases data set. In this data set, I have all of the cases defined. Now, depending on how you use case management, a case might be a school, it might be a household, it might be a student. In this case, a case is an individual piece of feedback that was given in a refugee camp. There's a new settings option available. Wasn't there in the previous release. And if I click on settings, you can see that I have display settings available. And so the option available here is to show the case list as either a tree list or as a table. And it's probably going to be easiest if I show you the difference between these two views on the device itself. So now here I am on my device, and I'm going to go ahead and click the Manage Cases button. And you can see that the case list here is basically a long list I can scroll through. For every case, there's a label displayed. Here I've got a lot that I'm trying to cram into the label. I've got a case ID, I've got what type of feedback it was, where it was collected, the name, when the case was last updated, when it was open to begin with. A lot of information I've packed into this label. And for every case, I have a set of forms available that I might fill out. So here, for example, I have a case update form I can fill out. Here we can see that I already actually filled out a case update form back on October 4th. And for this case here, I actually started to fill out a case update form, but I haven't actually finished it or sent it to the server yet. Now, this sort of list view works for some kinds of settings, and depending on how much information you have, how many cases have been assigned to particular devices or users. But the case list can get kind of out of hand. So in this case, you can see there are a lot of cases here. Finding the one that I want can be a little bit difficult. And there's just a little bit too much information here, and it could be difficult to find what I want. So back here on my server console, I'm going to go ahead and switch the view to a table view. And you can see that when I select the table view, I get to choose which columns to include in my case list table. And in this particular case data set, I have a lot of information available. Some of the information I have available, I have the unique ID, I've got the location where the feedback was originally started, the name of the person, the type of feedback, when the case was last updated. So ideally, I'd like to display all of this information to the user. And note that I'm not going to display this label column, which is where I'd sort of tried to cram all of this information. Now, if I go ahead and click Save and OK, that'll update the settings for this case's data set. So then, if I want to then flip back over to my case list, and I'm going to click the refresh button to refresh from the server now. And we can see that now the view changes entirely. So I now have this table view. This is a phone, and so there's not, and I'm in portrait mode, so there aren't that many columns that I can view at a glance. But note that I can scroll horizontally in order to view some of those extra columns. I can click the headers in order to sort by different criteria. So for example, if I'm looking for a particular case, I can sort the columns as appropriate. There's a filter button down here. So for example, if I wanted to filter for only, say, urgent, cases that had the word urgent in them, then I can see that now my table has been filtered down, and it's only listing the 4 cases that mention that they're urgent. And if I want to revert back to the full case list, then I can do that. Now, for any of these cases, I can choose any case in order to drill down and view more details. So for example, I just clicked on the first row, and I can see the details for that. If I click on the second row, I can see the case. And here now I can see the full label, and I can also see for example, if some case update forms have already been filled out. And if I want to click to say start updating the case, then I can do that also. So over the years, we've added more and more ways to use SurveyCTO, both in the field, in the office, using the new web interface. And some of our users have ended up with SurveyCTO server consoles with lots and lots and lots of forms on them. Now, in a prior release, we had the ability to add groups and subgroups and sort of organize those forms. You can see, for example, here in this example console, I have my forms organized by the review and correction workflow, my case management form and data set, my GPS example form, all organized into different groups. And our enterprise users have the ability to finally control the access privileges of different users by group. So you might have a certain set of users who have access only to edit forms in a certain group, or even see forms in certain groups. Now, still though, many users have access to many forms, and it gets a bit unwieldy to find the right form at the right time and work with those forms. So we've added some small improvements throughout the console. for example, a search function. So if I want to just search for case, then I can go and very quickly find the forms and data sets that have to do with cases. Or if I decide that I don't like the overall organization of my forms and data sets, I can certainly drag and drop my forms and data sets one by one to reorganize them. But if I really need to clean house and change the way the overall organization is, we've added a new organize function, which allows you to go through all of your forms and data sets, easily check off entire groups or multiple forms and data sets, and then choose where you would like to reorganize those. So it just makes it a little bit quicker and a little bit easier to reorganize. Now, as a server console is shared among more and more activities and forms and teams, it also becomes necessary to understand more about how people are using the system. And so, for example, this usage information that's been available for a while now about how many forms there are, how many submissions have come in the latest month, that sort of thing, or the amount of data storage that's being used, now you can click to drill down on more information to see exactly which forms are receiving what submissions and taking up what disk storage as part of your subscription. There's even an option here to look at what the disk storage is that's being used by certain forms prior to a certain date. So if you were to purge old data, how much storage would be freed up. And so that's another small thing that we've added as part of 2.40. Now finally, when it comes to users who have limited permissions, so if somebody logs into the server console and they don't have full rights to manage survey forms or design new forms or purge data, it used to be that they would still get all of these tabs, the design tab, collect tab, etc., but a lot of functions wouldn't be available for them. In 2.40, if you have users who have very limited permissions, they'll get a simplified view of the server console. And so you can see here, I'm logged in as a user who's allowed to submit data and also view or download data, but not edit forms, not purge data, or anything like that. And you can see that I have just one, there are no more tabs here, I just have one server console available, and I have one section that has all of my forms and data that I have access to, grouped in the appropriate groups, and then all of the things that I can do for each of those forms. So here, for this form, I can fill it out, I can share a link, I can monitor incoming data or look something up, I can look at quality checks or quality check reports, and then I can also explore or download the data. And we find that this new simplified interface is just a lot easier for users, that it might be partners or collaborators, where you're only giving them limited access. So this will happen automatically based on the privileges somebody has when they log into the SurveyCTO console. In this SurveyCTO 2.40 release, we've also added literally dozens of other smaller improvements. Everything from new math functions for in-form calculations to new preview options for enterprise administrators who are editing users and user roles. You can always update for free. Just go to our website and log in to manage your subscription and click the green button to update now. Thanks for using SurveyCTO.